Welcome to a rainy episode of Paranormal M, the channel where we uncover stories that will challenge your perception of reality. Don't forget to leave a comment below to help us with that algorithm, and subscribe and hit that notification bell to be the first to delve into our latest eerie narratives. Prepare for a journey into the unknown. The Ink Blot. So, I've been witness to a lot of paranormal and unexplainable events in my life. It's not that I go looking for it or anything, I just always seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Honestly, I would think myself of kind of a Looney Tune if others hadn't shared some of these moments with me. One day, my wife, a friend, and me were all sitting on the couch watching God knows what, having a discussion about something, when my wife stops mid-sentence and says, "What the hell is that? Is that a spider?" She pointed at something, but at first, me and my friend didn't know what she was pointing at. Then we saw it. In the center of the living room, there seemed to be something small and black hanging in the air. We all at first thought it was a spider or some bug. My wife is scared of spiders, so being the man of the house, I step up and remove the pest from the premises. When I got up and approached the quote-unquote thing, I quickly realized it was in fact not a spider or a bug. What I was looking at was, to me, what seemed like a drop of tar, black ink suspended in the air. I was like, "Guys, this is not a spider. Look." I then proceeded to wave my hands around it above and below, and there was absolutely nothing holding it in place. Being either incredibly brave or stupid, I went to touch it when my wife screamed, "No, don't touch it, are you crazy?" I stopped short, but not because of her. As I was going in to touch it, I kinda saw movement from this ink. It was your typical teardrop shape, but the skinny top part of the teardrop was moving around like a squid tentacle. This was some for real Marvel's Venom symbiote looking shit. I pulled my hand back and I sat back down on the couch between my friend and wife. For the next 5 minutes, that felt like an hour, the three of us sat in total awe as this black ink floated about 7 feet from the center of the living room, past all three of us through the storage room door. It was closed. It just materialized right through it. My first question was, "We all saw that, right?" Of course they had. My wife was the first to see it. My friend then immediately after, and my wife and I still to this day talk about the mysterious ink blob that floated through our living room. Crazy stuff, man. My grandma's goodbye. For a long time, I've had encounters of the paranormal kind, mostly while awake, but there have been a few instances that the spirits of loved ones visit my dreams. Back in 2005, I was living in New York. I moved there from Texas due to heavy involvement in drugs and gangs. Was there for about 5 months, met a girl, and moved in with her and her family. One night, I had an incredibly vivid dream about my grandmother. In my dream, I was walking on a beautiful beach with white sands. Just ahead of me was a canopy or something that, those things that pop up and people put at picnics and barbecues to give you shade. Well, I walk up to it and there was my grandmother sitting in a folding chair in front of a folding table, wearing a beautiful black dress, totally out of place for where we found ourselves. I sat down in the chair opposite of her and looked around confused. It was an odd scene, to say the least. "Oh, hey," she said, realizing I was there. "Want to play some Uno or Dominoes?" We used to play one every other time that we went together. I'm still confused, I said, "Sure, but what are you doing here?" As she set up the dominoes and did the whole shuffling thing, she said, "Well, you weren't around and I wanted to say goodbye." "Goodbye? Where are you going?" I asked. She didn't answer my question, but did say, "Please promise me that you'll stay out of trouble. Be a good man." "I promise, but where are you going? What are you doing here?" I asked as I looked out over the ocean. "Remember, I love you," I heard her say. As I turned back to her to say, "I love you too," she was gone. I stood up and looked around and saw her walking to the surf. I walked after her saying, "Nanny, Nanny." That's what we called her. "Where are you going?" She didn't answer but kept walking out into the ocean until she was completely gone. I was stricken with a sense of panic, but only for a moment because, as I looked around, I realized the canopy chairs and the table were gone, and they'd been replaced with a set of wide white stone stairs or stadium-type seats. Sitting on all of these were all of my family, uncle, aunts, cousins, and my mother. I woke up gasping for air with a totally weird feeling of urgency. I had to call and check on my grandma. I called my mother immediately, and before she could say anything, I asked, "Is Nanny okay?" My mom paused, and I heard a sniffle. "Son, Nanny passed away about an hour ago. I was about to call you and let you know," she said through restrained sobs. The dream suddenly made sense. She had come to me to say goodbye. See, I was raised around my mother's side of the family as a bunch of white country folk. I'm mixed, and I'm a little more brown than the rest of the grandbabies. Growing up, I was treated less than welcome by quite a few family members, but never Nanny. She loved me like I was one of her babies. Never made me feel unwelcome. If anything, she made me feel more loved than some of the others. We were pretty close. It was so heartwarming to know that before she left her plane of existence, she came to say goodbye. To be thousands of miles away was a moment in my life that I'm feeling more and more scared. So I'd like to start by saying I had a paranormal investigation team come to my apartment. They cleansed it, and it all seemed to calm down for the most part after their third visit. But just before Christmas, activity exploded. Doors slamming open in my apartment, voices, running footsteps, the faucets turning off and on by itself. Even my dog, just sometimes what looks like slapping others. I also have a clear as day voice memo of my friend and I sitting on the couch while I can link it here if possible. On Saturday, while I was using the bathroom, it sounded like somebody broke into my apartment. I still have Christmas decorations up, and the jingle bells on my front door went ballistic, like someone swung the door open and shut it. Granted, I never heard the door shut, and it was locked. It was about 1:30 a.m., and I live alone with my dog and kitten. They were hissing and snarling, like someone they hate just walked in. I must stress my kitten and dog are very loving towards each other, don't fight each other ever. I'm 5'1" and about 110 pounds. I'm not big, but I tried to make myself as mean-seeming as possible, and I ran out of the bathroom with one of the little pocket tasers out. What I saw when I exited the bathroom was shocking, to say the least. The heavy tray full of random things on my coffee table was now on the floor. Mind you, the only sound I heard before this was booming footsteps. Not something that I have trouble picking up sometimes laying on the ground. All the cabinets on my side table and coffee table were open, and I think the scariest part was my bar stools were still when I passed them. But as I checked the still locked doors, I heard my cat hissing from behind me. Both of my bar stools were spinning. One clockwise, the other counterclockwise. Then it was like somebody had grunted in my ear. Mentally, I tried to reason that my boyfriend had come over and was messing with me, until I realized that he was at his place, and more likely asleep, and he doesn't even have a key. I was still holding my little taser, and I hit the trigger and jammed it backwards, hoping to hit whoever was behind me. No sound, no nothing. No one was behind me. I then called my boyfriend, obviously shook up, not really wanting to talk about it when he asked. But today, things picked up a lot more. See, I work the night shift, therefore I sleep during the day. I was showering this morning, I live alone with my kitten and my dog. And the kitten was in the shower with me, because he's weird, and my dog was curled up on the mat next to the toilet. I turned around to reach for my soap, and it was like someone was standing in the bathroom pushing their arm through the shower curtain to touch me. I slapped it, not really knowing what to do. I think I made it mad. The curtain flung open and all the hooks came off the shower rod, and the whole thing hit the ground. My dog, who's normally tame, and a big scaredy cat, started growling and ran out of the room. I decided my hair didn't need to be washed, and I ran out, completely forgetting my towel. At this point, I was standing in the living room sopping wet, my dog crying with the kitten on the couch while I slowly spin around. It was like my apartment was alive. Everything seemed to be moving, the bar stools, the Polaroid camera on my coffee table. Even the leashes hanging from hooks by the door swayed. As fast as it all happened, it all stopped. It was quiet for a moment until my pet's food containers flipped over in the kitchen, and the water faucets in the bathroom and kitchen turned on full blast. I'd like to note that my kitchen has learned how to turn them on. My kitten, rather. So I kind of blame it on him, until I felt him walk up and start licking the water off my legs. I felt like crying at this point, like this horrible gut-wrenching feeling filled me, like something that felt worse than anything I've ever felt before. That's when I decided I'd have to go. I started putting on random clothes that I left hanging over my bar stool, and as I was putting on my pants, I noticed my extremely thick hair wasn't hanging over my head like it should when I'm putting my still wet body through leggings. A couple strands were lifted, like someone was holding them away from my face. I screamed and ran outside, holding my kitten and my very large dog in my arms. I could hear what sounded like growling as I closed the door. I sat in my car for about an hour and a half before I went back inside and put my dog in his kennel, which I shut both latches of. And this time I actually left. I was gone for about an hour due to an errand, and I had to run when I opened my front door and my dog jumped on me. Mind you, I locked him in his cage. His collar was off, unclipped, and he seemed happy enough. The cat bed and blanket that stay on top of it was also on the floor, and the kennel door was still locked. I was in shock to say the least. My dog is a big boy, very muscular, and this escape trick has only happened twice before. Once when I first got him, and today being the second. The entire apartment was cold, and truthfully, I feel like I tried everything to try to protect myself and my pets. If you'd like to hear about the stuff that happened previously, please let me know and I'd be glad to talk about it, get to the bottom of whatever this is. I'm strong to my faith. I pray every day. I've saged my apartment, as have a paranormal team that came 3 times. But nothing seems to be helping. But even with all this, plus the previous stuff that I've yet to post about on this page, I have to say, my bedroom is the absolute scariest place to be in my very small apartment. If anyone can offer advice or anything, please help. Haunted Fort of St. Augustine, Florida. I, a 25-year-old female, grew up for about 9 years in Florida for the first part of my life, living in St. Augustine in the Jacksonville area. For those of you that don't know, St. Augustine is one of the oldest and most haunted cities in the USA. In particular, there are 2 different forts located on the main island, and on a smaller island across from each other. I cannot fully recall the history of the 2 forts, but they would fight on a daily basis, with the mainland firing cannons at the island fort and so forth. I was about maybe 6 or 9 years of age when this happened. My parents had taken my brother and I on a day trip to tour the fort of the mainland. This fort was also a popular spot for ghost tours, telling stories about the prisoners kept underneath the fort, and how they would be brought to the outside walls to be executed and burned in a stone oven as well. Assuming this all happened during the early settlement of America, with colonists and whatnot. My brain can't recall the history, so don't hate on me. Common ghost appearances would be uniformed soldiers marching around at their stations and the like. The fort never employed real-life actors to dress up or anything, so if you saw a uniformed period-styled person, it was likely a ghost. The day we went to the fort to tour it, it was just like any other with plenty of visitors meandering inside and outside the walls. Since it was relatively small, my parents let my brother and I roam inside on our own. I had gone to the center of the fort and noticed 4 to 5 men in period uniforms on the right staircase hauling a whole cannon up the stairs like it was nothing. Nobody around me seemed to take notice of these men doing this, and I stared in utter disbelief that they suddenly appeared and began to drag a cannon upstairs to the ramparts. Not a minute later, I heard a loud cannon boom and jumped. I went running to my mother to ask her if she heard the cannon as well, to which she replied that she heard nothing. Nobody saw anything or heard any noise except me, in the middle of the day no less. I saw something on the reservation. I moved to Texas, but had to fly to Utah to pick up my car. It's February of 2020, and I leave Utah at approximately 6 p.m. with a friend who flew with me. We decided we'd spend the night in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so we could get some sleep and we'd arrive there around 4 a.m. So we're driving and things are fine. You have to pass through a reservation to get to the main highway for Albuquerque, and something felt off from the second that we entered New Mexico. It's maybe 2 or 3 a.m. at this point, and my friend was fast asleep with her head against the window while I played music loudly. We had to drive slowly as the speed limit was only 35 or 45 miles an hour. As we got further into the reservation, I heard a sharp knock on the roof of my car. It was hard enough to be clearly heard over the music. My friend was startled awake and asked what happened. I shrugged because I didn't want to stop. This might have been intuition, but I'd rather just have rock damage or drive on a flat tire or anything else than stop on that road. It was dark and something just felt wrong. I had really absurdly bright LED headlights on my car, and as such, I could see a few miles ahead where my car was going. My friend was watching the road and I slowed down to get a better look while it was still a good distance away. What I saw freaks me out to this day. The best way I could describe it was the body of a human, half contorted downward. The hair and head was upside down and its arms were like large stalactite-looking things. That thing was so dark that my headlights couldn't penetrate it. However, it illuminated everything around it. Its face wasn't looking at us originally, but it twisted its head around to look at us. It didn't have facial features, but it looked distorted like it had a broken jaw or something, and it was almost blurry. I pride myself on my photographic memory, but it was like it didn't want me to see it. At this point, we're no more than 50 to 75 feet away, and I step on it. My friend asks if I saw it, and I nodded my head. I didn't even want to talk if I was being honest. I didn't want to breathe. I was shaking so badly. It felt ominous, evil. I can't even put my explanation into full detail, the fear that I was feeling. It was like it penetrated my bones. It was a primal instinct to run, and run as fast as I could, away from it. I told her not to look back. We don't want it to follow us. I swear I drove a solid 120 plus miles an hour. I just got off the reservation completely. We didn't end up stopping in Albuquerque. I drove all the way to Lubbock instead and spent the night there. My work asked for paranormal stories, and I told this. A coworker mentioned putting it here because she thinks that y'all will like it. I can also attempt drawing it, but I feel like if I do that, I might give it the ability to find me, or even power to do whatever it is that it's doing. So if anybody has any advice on that, let me know. I don't want to encourage it. I think something else moved in. Sorry if this is all over the place. Any advice would be appreciated. I think I'm going slightly mad, but who knows? I bought my first house 2 years ago. It was built in the 40s or 50s, a terraced house with a converted attic. At first I lived here alone and everything was okay. I felt watched sometimes, but I figured it was just me living alone for the first time. I then started looking after my family dog during the first lockdown. I didn't feel watched as much, but whatever it was felt further away. I mentioned it to my mom and sister, but they thought I was just being odd as I wasn't scared. Whatever it was didn't want to hurt me, they just observe. So it was dismissed. My partner moved in and I started feeling watched at night, as I'm a night owl, but I just closed the door or I would feel whatever it was peeking in through the crack in the door. We got a puppy who just seems sort of oblivious, but is always around me, especially when I go upstairs. I've always been sensitive when it comes to these things, and I've only seen something very scary once, but that was a very long time ago at a different house. My mother moved in with my partner and I pretty much stay in this converted attic. She used to be a sound sleeper. Since she's moved in, though, she can't get a good night's sleep. I'm pregnant and things have been getting creepier. Firstly, I keep seeing something standing in the corner of my eye, no matter what I'm doing. I'll look to where it should be, but I see nothing. When I go back to it, it's gone for a little while, and then come back and I have to check again. Today it was while I was working, and it was stood by my window, but each time I looked it was gone. Second, when I was awake at night, love pregnancy insomnia, there's something peeking from the bathroom. The dog sleeps on the bed and he ignores it, but then I started getting an image in my head of just out of nowhere something crawling from the bathroom down the hall. This has only been since I've been pregnant, and only when it's dark. I have to check the door, and I swear it opens more. Probably an overactive brain and wind. Third, so my mom hasn't been sleeping well, waking up a lot. She thought it was stress from work. Last night she feels something tapping her on both sides of the chest. She was awake, and the next thing she feels when she turns over is something tapping her on the arm, keeping her awake. She feels that it may have been, just waking her up for a while, but this is the first time she's been awake for it. Pretty sure that it's been more of what I have put in, but nothing springs to mind. So what do you guys think is going on with my house? Moving out is not an option at this time, even though I do plan to move in the next few years. Walking skeletons on top of a train car. When I was 6 or 7, we moved out to a ranch on the countryside of Laredo, Texas. Not a lot of people with good income lived out here. Most houses were isolated and surrounded by woods. My mom and stepdad decided to rent this house because rent was cheap. Only $350 a month, no indoor plumbing or central air. A lot of low-income families lived out here. There's a family that lived next to us, a family of 6 kids, all girls and 2 adults. They were also low-income and often didn't have much to eat. My mom would often help them out with food, and in return, the kids would come over and help my mom clean the house. This one day they came over, ate dinner with us, helped my mom clean, and me and the youngest girl that was about my age fell asleep on my bed. After a while, my mom woke up because it was getting late. She needed to go home. Her sisters had left her behind because they didn't want her awake. It was a good walk to her home, as there was a dirt road leading to our house to get to hers. My mom was going to send my brother to walk her, but I butted in and said, "Please, can I walk her?" As we were friends, my mom said yes, so I then walked her to the gate. And we departed. I started on my way home, when out of nowhere she comes running behind me, crying, throws herself at me and pulls me down by the shoulders. I ask her what's wrong, what happened. She points up and says, "Look up there, look." She was pointing up to the top of some abandoned train cars, and what I saw till this day I can't explain. There were 3 skeletons walking back and forth. I was like, what? The one was laying on its side. It had clothes on too, like a tank top and shorts. The other 2 were standing up and walking back and forth behind that one, stopping and waving high. We looked at each other and then ran to my house. I quickly told my mom what we just saw. My mom and 2 brothers plus us went back to look, and they were still there, waving high at us. We threw rocks at them, but the rocks didn't faze them, just like they went through them. Either that or we were just bad at aiming. After a while, we went home and never saw them again. Till this day, I can't seem to understand or be able to explain how those skeletons were moving. Some will probably say that we were hallucinating, but how can 5 people see the same thing? Some have said that it was Halloween props, but nope. It was the 90s and never seen no Halloween props that moved like that well during that time. The technology wasn't really yet for that kind of movement. Halloween props like that cost a lot of money, and that family couldn't even afford to eat. We were in dirt poor country. Something I think was a demon, but not entirely sure. This scenario happened when I was younger, maybe 8 or 7. My older brother and I shared a bedroom since we lived in a pretty small apartment at the time, and it was next to a really busy road, so there was always a lot of noise. It was time for us to go to sleep since it was a school night. So I go say goodnight to my older sister and parents and head to bed. My older brother's bed was by the window and mine was up against a wall. Since we lived next to a super busy road, the street lamp would shine through our window because our curtains were really thin. A little while goes by and I struggled to fall asleep because I could hear drunk people screaming and shouting at cars that drove past. Then all of a sudden, everything goes quiet. No cars, no people, nothing. I find this odd, but don't think much of it when my cat runs up to the window. Before I could question why she did, I hear the weirdest, loudest, unexplainable screech. I go to grab my cat away from the window because I didn't want whatever made that noise to see her. This noise obviously woke my brother up. We both look out the window to see what it is. There was this weird pterodactyl-looking creature sitting on top of the street lamp with its wings widespread. I look at my brother and he looks like he's about to cry. I grab him and my cat and run to my bed and hide underneath the blanket since it's the furthest thing away from the window. When we wake up the next morning, I tell my older sister about what happened. And she said that she heard the noise too. She looked out her window briefly and saw it fly out of view. I drew what it looked like just to make sure that she saw the same thing as I was seeing, and it wasn't just a bird. She said that it looked exactly like it. We told her parents about it, and they really didn't comment much on it since my siblings and I have a history of telling our parents weird, abnormal things, like seeing a tall man walk up and down the stairs at night, and another man standing at the edge of our beds looking at us. Let's just say, I hope I never hear or see that thing again. Has anyone ever experienced an EVP before? The only reason I believe in ghosts is because I experienced an EVP on an accident once when I was 15 years old. I was recording a one-on-one basketball game with my brother and I in our driveway. I watched the video a couple of times and I realized a little halfway through the video a voice says, "What you doing, Ian?" and then laughs in an inhuman way, a sort of cross between a ghoul and a cartoon character. Hard to explain. I remember showing my sister and brother-in-law, and they said, "Oh, dude, you're done for," and they laughed. My mother, who doesn't believe in ghosts, was trying her hardest not to hear it, and when she finally heard it, she said it did it to trick her. Or rather, I did it to trick her. My friends straight up didn't know how to react. They don't believe in ghosts. Nobody else was home that day, but my mom, me, and my brother. My brother and I were playing basketball, and my mom isn't really one to play tricks or mimic spirits. She's straightforward and religious. There's something very, very unsettling about a spirit saying your actual name. It knows me. It didn't say something generic or random like hello or stay away. It literally said my name. And that has to mean that it's been around for a while. Makes my skin crawl to think something's been watching me without me knowing for who knows how long. Growing up, I never experienced anything paranormal. Why and how would something say my name on a random video like that, broad daylight, unprovoked? Where did it come from? My dad and I saw the same UFO 35 years apart. I was 10 years old. My brother and I were the last ones off the bus from school every day. We were nearing my house, which is in the Midwest countryside. Lots of cows and trees and fields. Anyways, about a mile away from my house, I look out the window and saw an orange blimp in the sky. Standard American football-sized blimp, in shape. Surprisingly, didn't think anything of it, because a day or so beforehand, me and a bunch of kids at recess saw a blue blimp in the sky. I watched it, thought it was cool to see a blimp this far outside of town, especially near my house. And after a few seconds, the blimp shifted from a football shape to a star. Literally shrunk before my eyes into a tiny, shiny dot that resembled a star in the night sky. Except it wasn't a star. It was just a blimp a second ago. Not even 2 seconds after it shifted, it launched even further into the sky, shot down to its original height, and then shot completely off into space. It was the most bizarre thing I'd ever experienced. I was kind of a quiet kid, but being the last kid on the bus besides my brother, I shouted about it. And when I got off the bus, I ran to my mother to tell her, like a crazy old man yelling at the end of times. My mother said I was crazy, naturally, and I never told my dad because my mom shut me down pretty hard and it killed my mood. Fast forward 22 years later, shortly after I turned 22, my dad and I took a short road trip to go pick up a car that he bought halfway across the state. We talked about it a lot and somehow got on the topic of UFOs. He told me when he was 12 or 13, him and his brothers were playing down by a creek near their house, which, by the way, his old house was only a few miles away from our house. And they saw an orange football-shaped object in the sky. I was absolutely blown away when he said that. My father is skeptical and doesn't believe in this kind of stuff, ever. But when I shared my story, he paused and admitted that it was very, very odd to have seen the exact same thing more than 30 years apart. Living in a Catholic volunteer house proved hauntings to me. I spent August of 2019 to August of 2020 living in a Catholic volunteer house. While I was religious, I didn't really believe in much of the paranormal outside of cryptids and extraterrestrials. The church was more of a social thing for me, and I was deeply drawn to the ritual of it all. I point this out to make it clear that I was not looking for an experience in this house. It didn't take long living there to start noticing odd things. It started off as the sound of footsteps. That was I guess you could say that was easy to write off, and it was just an old house. Perhaps the house was just shifting, as some people say. These footsteps became so constant that it clearly couldn't be the sounds of an old house. The footsteps were loud. They were during the day and the night, and when the house was full, and when it was just one person inside. I stopped denying this when the steps were obviously coming from the stairs. The clear sound of the top floor windows closing and opening started, and nothing sounds like that other than just that. The basement door to the outside would open by itself after us knowing for sure that it was closed and locked. Not even a minute before, it's suddenly being opened. It was like these sounds were well thought out. They would lead me to the attic only for me to be immediately hearing rushing steps down the stairs on the floor below me. So often that I would be led into the basement and my attention couldn't shift from the doors. Looking at those doors filled me with an odd dread that would go away the moment I walked away. That was called the coal room. My housemates were scared, and being the only male in a Catholic program put a bit of pressure on me to do something. Just a cultural expectation. I tried getting a priest out to do a blessing, but he couldn't because of COVID. Strange bummer given the theology. I ended up trying to, I guess you could say, my best to bless the house myself with one of my housemates. That did nothing to stop any of it. Swapped houses from a small apartment to an old house. Weird things started happening. Yesterday when I was going to sleep, I walked up the stairs to my bedroom at about 1 a.m. I live with my parents, so my mom was sleeping in her room, my dad fell asleep on the couch, and my dog was sleeping in my bedroom. When I closed the door, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, and I have a very creaky staircase, so you can hear when somebody's walking up. I checked and there was no one in there. My mom was still sleeping in a room, my dad still asleep on the couch. So I just moved in from an apartment building to a quite old house a few months ago, which was at first quite strange to me since the apartment I lived in was small and the family wanted to quickly swap even though they had a bigger house. And they have, I think, 3 children that will have to share one bedroom, but they still really wanted to swap with us. So we did the swap and there wasn't much going on at the beginning. Things began starting to be a bit weird after about 3 months. At first, I started only hearing some weird sounds, like footsteps coming from upstairs. Didn't really pay much attention to that. After some time, occasionally doors in the house, mostly to my bedroom, started opening by themselves. One time on Halloween night, the doors to my room busted open like somebody kicked them in. I then started waking up sometimes at about 3 at night by my dog. And he sleeps in my room every night, barking and growling at nothing in the room. This happened a lot, not every night, but maybe a few times a month. I started hearing heavy things being dropped in my bedroom from time to time, but when I went to check, I could never find anything that might have fallen, although sometimes I can see things falling on their own. One night, a cabinet opened itself and a jar dropped from it. I remember a few days ago I woke up in the morning to get ready for college and my dad's guitar started playing by itself. Wasn't any song, just like something was hitting random strings. After that, the guitar just fell. The guitar was standing there for about a month without anyone ever touching it. A few nights ago, I remember I woke up at around 3 a.m. to see my dog again growling at nothing in my room, when suddenly the door opened by himself. The dog walked out of my room, through that door, and started barking at something at the bottom of the stairs. I told her to go back in, close the door, but she did not stop growling. This might also sound a bit weird, but sometimes you can feel like something's staring at you when you walk up the stairs. I've also got an Alexa, and sometimes when nobody says anything, she would randomly go, "Sorry, didn't quite catch that." Or she would start saying random Wikipedia articles when no one was even talking to her. I have an EMF, so I tried to leave it on my shelf and record through the night with the night vision camera, but I didn't manage to capture anything. One night I did record something that looked like an orb, but I thought it was just a bug. As I said, I don't know if I'm overreacting or maybe it's just a thought that I might ask for some help. I experienced something and I can't logically explain, and I need opinions before I lose my mind. As an avid horror enjoyer, across all media and otherwise, I've always been interested in the paranormal. That being said, I've also always been a huge skeptic. I poke holes in other stories all the time. I always have. I've just never been on that side of the fence, you could say. I swear by science and logic and whatever, but earlier something fairly small happened that completely rocked me. I woke up at around 1:40 a.m. and went to the loo about 10 or 15 minutes later, at which point I was already properly awake because I'd let my dogs out into the garden and been on my phone for a little while. My bedroom is at the bottom of my stairs. My loo is at the top. Anyway, when I came back downstairs and into my room, I checked my door so my dogs didn't get out of the room when I went back to sleep and sat down. Not 20 seconds later, I hear Diamond coming down the stairs. This isn't uncommon in my house since 5 people live here, so somebody's always coming up and using the loo to get a drink or whatever. But when I got to the bottom of the stairs, my door opened and the hallway was empty and the lights were still off. I went out to look, and everybody's bedroom's door was shut and no one was up and about. Someone mentioned my stairs creaking in their own because, yeah, they're wood, but I've lived in this house for nearly a decade. They creak on their own all the time nowadays. But anyone with old wooden stairs would probably know the difference between that and somebody literally walking down them. My door, when literally shut, can't be opened on its own because of the type of latch, or whatever it's called. I know no one's here has any reason to believe me, but I'm hoping somebody would humor me and just give me their take on it. Being a skeptic, a big part of me for a long, long time, so I guess I'm pretty rattled by this. Strange stuff happens around me all the time, but I'm always able to come up with a logical explanation. But I can't for this one. Strange 911 call. I'm a male in my 20s and I do medical work from home. Therefore, my internet is a need for my job. After phone issues, I never reconnected my number since what I need is for Wi-Fi anyways, and I rarely travel, so I figured it doesn't pay financially when there's access to most needs. Anyways, all morning long, my programs were running slowly and things weren't responding. While currently living with my grandmother, as I'm working, I kind of hear when family call her to check in on her. My uncle normally calls earlier than normal on this day and claims that he called her multiple times before while no calls came through. Around 1:50 p.m., everything crashed completely. No phone nor internet was available. I tried to restart the router multiple times, completely shutting off and checking wires. Previous DSL wires were spliced and managed to be fixed, but after all, still no phone or internet, no service on my cell phone, so all means of communication were down. You got the rundown, so this is where things get odd. 2:50 p.m., a state trooper shows up at my door claiming they received a 911 call from our landline number. Confused, I asked her what time she received the call, and she replied 15 minutes before she showed up at the door. My grandmother does have a life alert for when I'm not there, so I informed her of it. She did restate that the call did come from the landline number, also confirming the last few digits. She asked to come in and we sort of talked some more. She made conversation with my grandmother and I went to go grab the house phone. I seen the screen still displaying check telephone line stating that it was still down. I went back to her saying that we couldn't possibly make the call while giving her the phone. She picked up and it was dead air, no sound. 11 p.m. as I'm writing this and still no connection. I told her about the situation this morning, and that's when she received the call. It was within the time frame of not being able to receive connection. Her face said it all. I still have no clue what happened, and I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. We have internet back, but still no phone. Internet came back about 15 minutes after the trooper headed out. I've dealt with paranormal events my entire life and even more. Recently, I found a familiar painting known as the Crying Boy in an antique shop near me, and I have photos of it. TCB is known as a cursed painting. Not sure if there's any relevance of having these photos of it on my phone or not, but maybe this is just another paranormal experience to add to the list. After all, the trooper did mention my deceased grandfather's name, who I've had another very visual experience with after missing him some night. Would love to tell you more stories about my life, have photos and more to go along with them. Have more to go along with some of them. Never went back in the woods alone after this. This story happened 3 years ago when I was 15 in my village. I don't tell this story much because people tend to think that I'm making it up, but I've been thinking of it quite a lot this week, and I want people to know. My village is located in a rural area that's protected by the government because it's been considered a natural paradise for the last 30 years. This means that exploration in this area is quite difficult nowadays, since it is forbidden to cut trees, which means that it is a huge forest. I was spending my summer there, and my favorite thing was going hiking. Although I had never gone alone into the woods, just roads with people, my grandma had told me that cleaning services had opened and rehabilitated a path that had been covered in bushes and trees for the last 30 years because of a race that was being prepared, like runners and stuff. Usually I'd go to the nearest town about an hour away by foot, but the only way I knew was the road. On my way back from seeing friends there, I took a new path that my granny said was safe, alone. Mistake, by the way. The first part of the path was the easiest. Just too many obstacles and landslides, but it was nothing compared to the rest. The second part was a hill full of rocks that was the hardest thing to go up. Literally had to climb on 4 legs like a dog. When I got to the top, I looked around and found some animal bones. I didn't pay much attention to it since the area is known for its big population of wolves and bears that go out at night. I continued my way faster than before, and this part was plain floor, where the woods really begin. So it was a relief until I got to a dead end. Some huge trees had fallen exactly on a row on the path, and it was impossible to cross them. This seems really off to me because there were no other fallen trees. The weirdest part? Aside those trees there was a little barn. Yeah, a barn in the middle of the woods. Thought to myself that it was probably abandoned. It looked like it, so I decided to throw my bag into the little field that belonged to the barn and then cross the fence. I crossed it running without realizing the most bizarre thing. That field had no trees in it. It was clear, no bushes, no big plants, nothing. Really shouldn't be like that if it was abandoned. I started feeling concerned about the location of the fallen trees, and that it was pretty coincidental how there casually was a barn beside a clear field when that path had been closed for 30 years. Just seemed really off. I went on, and luckily I was reaching the last hill my grandma had described, the one that connected with the village. Suddenly, there was a silent moment in the woods, which allowed me to hear some branches cracking behind me. Thought to myself if it was a bird or something, but they came closer. They really sounded like footsteps. After trying to convince myself it was probably an animal, I was so afraid I couldn't look back, I started walking faster. Guess what? So did the footsteps. I just started running after noticing that, And so did the footsteps again. I was running for my life at this point. Suddenly I started hearing incredibly loud grunts. Everything was going really fast. Luckily, I got to my village in a minute or so after that. I got into the patio of the first house, and I found just closed the door. It was a relative's house, so no need to call the police. I stayed there for 10 minutes until I got my breath back, and then came back home. I get the chills just from remembering the place. Not having signal in the middle of nowhere and the grunts made me think that there was something following me, since the barn and the trees were just a distraction to slow me down. Never went into the woods alone after that, you could say. Noises late at night. An object moved right in front of me. For some context on this situation, I live with 4 roommates, and several days ago, at around 2:30 in the morning, it sounded like somebody was moving pots and pans around in our kitchen very loudly. At the time, I thought nothing of this, as we're all college students, so someone was surely making a meal that late at night. I asked all of them in the following days, and nobody was out of their rooms or was awake at that time. One other roommate heard this and had the same thought. After this, we searched the whole house and even checked in our attic to see if someone was living there. No one was up there. Nothing's really occurred since. Besides the gaping hole where one of my roommates fell through the ceiling. He's okay, and it was hilarious, by the way. That's weird. Until I had a very strange occurrence earlier in the day. I'm still pretty creeped out, as this happened a little less than an hour ago. I was sitting at my desk just doing some work, and I'd been there for a couple of hours not doing much. Just in the flow of work and in my own little world. I have a journal with a pen resting next to it that's been stationary for hours. I noticed the pen start to move slightly, and move back to its original position. I think nothing of it, but once I take my eyes off the pen and back to the monitor, it rolls to the middle of my desk and stops in the middle of my mouse pad. This may be a tiny thing that I chalked up to me doing something that caused it to move. I was looking for a song on my TV, and it was completely motionless when this occurred. I proceed to stare at this pen for a minute or two, and I say out loud, "Roll back, please." I was hoping for something, but unfortunately nothing occurred. I put the pen back in its original spot and started messing with it, seeing what caused it to move and if maybe something minor could have caused it. I can confidently say that it took some energy to get this pen rolling from my side of the journal. This was not a gust of wind that caused this, and was not caused by a banging on the desk or any other type of motion in the room. There was none. The other very concerning thing about this is that the pen continued to roll down the entirety of my mousepad until it hit my keyboard, unlike what it did when the first time it moved, where it stopped in the middle of my desk. I've tried rolling this pen repeatedly for the past hour and a half and can't recreate it without stopping the pen myself. I know this is pretty minor compared to other people's experience here, but it was enough for me to sage my house and hope for the best. Helpful ghost. My first positive paranormal experience. So this just happened today, so it's super fresh. A little long also, by the way. A little background. I've had paranormal experiences before that were super scary. It always occurred when I'm half asleep or even dead asleep at 3 a.m. I've heard whispers in another language, and the next day having the worst day of my life. Maybe I'll tell the bad experiences in another post. So I learned in the past few years that these things are real, first-hand experience. Coming to today, I moved to a new country, and ever since I moved to this home, I'm getting weird dreams every day. I don't usually dream much, and I know it's this home only because last week I was on vacation in another place and had 0 dreams. But it never felt evil here, it just felt weird. So today I had a major interview which I was preparing for about a week. I had to put an alarm on, and I'm the type of person who needs a single alarm to wake up. My interview was at 11 a.m. Alarm was at 9 a.m. I snoozed, unfortunately, but once I did that, I was still remembering my preparation and answers for the interview while resting my eyes when I was half asleep. This is when I feel a distinct someone poking my shoulder from behind to wake me up. Twice. It was like poke, 2-second gap, poke. My eyes immediately open and I see that I'm lying facing my husband, so the wall is behind me. I can still feel a little pressure on where it poked, and I start praying because at first I thought it's another bad entity like the last couple of times. My heart's exploding and I'm praying, but unlike last time, I felt the vibes weren't negative. So I turn around, grab my phone, and see the time. It's 10:30, and the ghost woke me up in time for my interview. I just thanked it and told it, please don't help or come in front of me because I'm scared of this stuff. I spoke to a spirit on the phone. For context, I've been friends with someone for a couple of years now, and we had a very rough childhood, to say the least. One of the reasons was that he spent a large portion of his childhood without his mother. That's important. As he got older, he tried to look for her and the reason for her disappearance from his life. I promised to help him look for his mom, and I did try, but my research was pretty much fruitless until 2 weeks ago. He lives in a different country, so we can't physically meet yet. We went from texting almost every day to not texting for weeks at a time. So naturally, I was concerned. I hit up another friend of mine who reads tarot cards and asked her to tap into his energy for me to check if he was doing okay. Things were normal until she told me that she kept hearing a woman crying and saying, "Sorry." And, "Mommy did not abandon you," in Korean. The guy is ethnically Korean. Immediately after... Somebody outside my house. Immediately after, my friend tells me that she was starting to lose control of her movements. And all of a sudden I hear what sounded like completely different women crying and talking to me completely in Korean on the other line. In other words, my friend was possessed. At that point, I was freaking out because I didn't expect a random entity to pull up during a tarot reading. I'm a scaredy cat by nature, so normally I would hang up right then and there, but this time I felt compelled to stay and listen. Spirit didn't feel like a bad one anyway, so I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I felt deep in my soul that I was speaking to my friend's mother, and I couldn't shake that feeling off. So I said her name and asked if it was her that I was speaking to. She confirmed that it was. She understood what I was saying in English, but replied in Korean. Because I didn't speak Korean, she would let my friend come back to her normal self to translate what was being said to me. We spoke for a while, and I learned quite a lot about her. She seemed to be quite fond of me and explicitly stated that she didn't mind that I was from a different race and culture from her son. She was a very sweet lady who was a victim of life circumstances and was looking out for her son even in death. This is my craziest paranormal experience to date, but it's also one of the most wholesome experiences I've ever had. I don't think I'll ever forget about it or her. The girl haunting the apartment. This all started when I was 12. It was around late 2012. We met the girl. Let's call her Sarah, and her boyfriend at the time through my cousin and a bunch of his friends. Sarah was a really kind-hearted person, almost too pure for the world. She was black, although lighter-skinned in complexion, had short, natural red hair and freckles. She was also very heavy in weight. I believe almost twice my size, and keep in mind, I'm a plus-sized girl myself. And almost anyone that she knew, including her boyfriend, who was also cheating on her, and let it be known, made fun of her for her looks. I was going through the exact same thing and still am. So I understood. My family and I, as in my mom, my stepdad, and little sisters, tried everything we could to at least get a smile out of her, with varying degrees of success, too. But we all knew that she was very depressed and her self-esteem was very low to the point of not being able to fix it. Sarah stayed in our apartment for a couple of months before moving in with my cousin's then girlfriend. Let's call her Susie. My building is in the front and Susie's was all the way in the back and the side, so Sarah would come back and visit on a regular basis. All seemed normal until one day she showed up. I don't remember everything that was said, but I do remember one thing vividly. She sighed and told my mom that she was leaving. I didn't think much of it at first, and one day I came home from school to the news that Sarah had committed suicide. I'm 100% sure that it was her boyfriend mainly who drove her to her breaking point. She was only 23. She was also pregnant at the time, and it happened a month after I turned 13. Susie moved out of the apartment complex very soon after that happened. If you don't already know, when you commit suicide or die a violent death or unexpected death, your soul tends to remain trapped here on Earth for various reasons. The experience I'm about to explain in a minute made me believe in that even more strongly. So in other words, she's stuck in the apartment in which she died and haunts it. Several months later, everybody pretty much has moved on. I made the dumb move of taking a shortcut through that particular building. When I walked past the apartment door, I started catching a smell that I very much associated with Sarah. Thought it was my mind playing tricks on me at first, but the smell was so strong that I started feeling dizzy. I felt like I was being watched, and I started hearing heavy, lazy footsteps. The hairs on my neck and arms were standing at attention. Something urged me to turn around, and that's when I realized it wasn't my imagination at all. I saw a huge, shadowy figure at first. Remember, I mentioned she was very large in size. And then I saw the edge of a blue Lilo and Stitch blanket that once belonged to me emerging from the shadow. I remember giving the blanket to her months before she died, and because she loved it so much, she always covered herself in it. The closer the figure was coming to me, the more I got scared. The sadder the atmosphere was, and the heavier the air was, too. I booked it the hell out of the building and was pretty amazed at how fast I got home. To this day, I get chills and the feeling of being watched when I walk past that building. I never saw her physically again, but I still try to avoid that building when I can. As for her boyfriend, I rarely hear from him now. Maybe he settled down with another woman, and he's now laying low. Maybe he moved. Something watched me sleep. This happened about 7 years ago, but I still remember it like it happened yesterday. I was maybe 16 at the time, and super into the paranormal. I grew up in the church, and I was told time and time again that the paranormal didn't exist outside of the realm of just demons and angels. So as any curious teenager had to find out for themselves, my friend and I snuck out to buy a Ouija board. The two of us then drove out and parked on a deserted road, so there would be no chance of either of our religious parents finding out what we were doing. Because, as you would assume, a Ouija board was a big no-no. The two of us climbed in the back seat of our car and set out the board. I think about an hour went by of absolutely nothing happening besides one of us getting jittery and just kind of moving the planchette slightly. Then it did start moving. It was slow, but it gave us a year and spelled rape. That was it. We tried to ask questions, but no response. We said goodbye and drove to a grocery store and threw the board away. I looked up the year and the sexual assault cases in our area and had fortunately found one. The case happened in the late 1970s, so I couldn't find much information. but I was definitely unsettled and overwhelmingly confused on why this was communicated with us. Went home that night, felt super anxious, and I had a hard time falling asleep, but nothing happened. Nothing did happen for 3 weeks following that night. Before I get into what occurred, I need to describe my bedroom at the time. When you come in the door to my room, there's a closet on the left, and then my bed is a few feet away, tucked into the corner of the wall. Straight ahead is a big window, and to the right is a desk and a dresser. On the left wall, starting at the door and going around to my bed, there is a line of posters and records, with a bulletin board right above the head of my bed. The right side wall is covered with even more. So anyway, I come home from school and I go about my business. That night I go to bed still feeling uneasy, but fell asleep rather quickly. When I wake up in the morning and roll over, I feel multiple sharp stabs on my side. I sit up and see that the bulletin board had fallen down right next to my head, and the tacks were all over my bed and stabbing into me. I look around my room and I felt chills. The posters and records from the doorway to my bed on the left had all fallen off. The ones on the other wall were all still up, but not even crooked. I checked around the rest of the house, especially rooms sharing that wall. Nothing else had been displaced in the slightest. So to me it seems that something had come into my room, knocked everything off the wall moving towards my bed, and stopped when it was right over my head while I slept. The rain is one thing, but Mr. Bird over there. Something is knocking on windows. Some background on the first incident. My dad, a 55-year-old male, and I, a 23-year-old female, went on a trip across country to move me to a new state. One of the stops on the way would be my dad's uncle's, a 73-year-old male. We'll call him Mark. We went to his cabin. The cabin is situated in rural Illinois, about 55 minutes from the nearest town. There's no street markings whatsoever, and the nearest neighbor is a good 6 miles away. Mark is a farmer by trade, so his cabin is surrounded at least 200 acres of farmland, right in the middle of Shawnee National Forest. On 2 sides of the cabin there's woodland so thick you couldn't walk throughout, and on the other 2 sides there's fields of crops. Now the cabin itself is 3 stories. The basement just houses a small garage and a laundry room. The middle floor is the largest, having Mark's bedroom, the kitchen, the living dining room, and a bathroom. The top floor is just a landing, and 2 bedrooms that connect through a shared bathroom. My dad and I each got one of the bedrooms. The middle floor has a raised deck on 3 sides that are full of windows and has a massive sliding glass door. And you guessed it, when it's nighttime out, there's absolutely nothing to subset the darkness. You can't see a single thing out of the windows no matter how hard you try. Now let's move on to the creepy part. The first night we stayed there, I was sitting on my dad's bed chatting. He had his window open to ventilate the room, and you could hear lots of movement from outside on the ground level. Of course, we couldn't see anything. We could only hear trees swaying, branches and dry grass crunching by something walking on it. Don't worry, we assumed it was deer, as there's many in the area, and went to bed without any issues. The next day comes and goes after my dad and I spent it exploring the area on a UAV. The next night after Mark goes to bed, my dad and I were sitting in the living room watching an old movie on TV. This was around 9 p.m., and I remember getting this distinctly anxious feeling while sitting there with my dad. I routinely looked through some of the windows that were surrounding it, but as you guessed, I could see nothing but black. Around 10:30, my dad and I go to our appointed bedrooms, and he quickly falls asleep. I messed around on my phone till around 1:30. At this point, I shut my door, to the point where only a sliver of light is getting into my room and I could barely see out into the dim landing. I plugged my phone into the charger, hop into bed, ready to go to sleep. Around 20 to 30 minutes go by of me trying to fall asleep, and that's when I hear it clear as day. There's a loud and forceful knock on one of the windows, 3 distinct knocks. I shoot up in bed and just sit there for a few seconds, listening and looking out through that small crack in the door. I get up and I'm hit with this overwhelming feeling that I shouldn't open my door and go out. So I end up going through the shared bathroom and into my dad's room. I wake the poor guy up from a dead sleep and tell him that I heard somebody knock on either the glass doors or the windows. My dad gets up and I follow him downstairs, and he checks the entire house before locking both of the doors that my uncle always leaves open. After turning on the porch light and checking the house, we found nothing and go back up to our rooms. I'm extremely unsettled, but could tell my dad was assuming I just freaked myself out. The next morning comes around. I go downstairs where my dad is sitting at the table with Mark. Apparently, the two had been discussing what I had heard the last night. That's when my dad tells me that Mark had heard the same knocking at the same time of night on 3 separate occasions. The first time he heard the knocking, he immediately jumped up from bed and grabbed the shotgun that he keeps in his closet. He knew there would be no one and nothing good knocking at his door in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m. He saw nothing when he looked outside, and when the knocking came twice more, he didn't bother checking it. Now, Mark is a 73-year-old tough cowboy that's straight up fearless and doesn't find any enjoyment in lying. We left the same day to continue our journey across the states. The second event occurred just last week. My dad was visiting my mom and in her 2-bedroom house before he flew out of the city's airport the next day. Due to him being there, I spent the night on an air mattress on the floor of my mom's bedroom while he slept in my bed. My mom's bedroom is in the back of the house, with a small backyard and then a sloped 6-foot wall leading up to the, I guess you could call, the desert being all that there was. Around 5 a.m., I'm jolted away, and this is some extremely loud knock on my mom's bedroom window. I sit up and just stared at the curtain-covered window. My mom had already been awake, early riser, and had her earphones in watching something. She yanked them out and asked me if I had heard it as well. The two of us just sit in silence. She tells me that if she opens the curtains, she just knows that something's going to be staring back at her. I go and wake up my dad, poor dad, tell him that the two of us heard something at my mom's window. He goes outside and finds nothing, but reports that he had heard the dogs barking off and on for a little over an hour. Strange. My mom and I heard no barking whatsoever. The sun comes and goes, and nothing else happens the next night, or any night since then.